Imagine a boy walking alone through a city that forgot he existed. Imagine his little hands holding half a piece of bread, his only meal for the day. In a world so cold and loud, love doesn't always come from those who have everything. Sometimes, it comes from those who have absolutely nothing. Eli was 12, and already the weight of the world sat heavy on his thin shoulders. Orphaned before he could form full memories, he grew up in a crumbling shelter on the edge of the city, where hunger was normal, and affection was a luxury never promised. Each morning, he saved half of whatever food he was given. Not out of habit, but out of fear that tomorrow, there would be nothing. He had learned early that survival came from discipline, not comfort. But on this gray, wind-stung afternoon, something changed. As Eli passed through the city park, his eyes landed on a figure slumped over a wooden bench. An old man wrapped in a torn blanket sat motionless. His beard was overgrown, his eyes distant, his body trembling from the cold that bit through his bones. People walked by. No one looked. No one cared. But Eli stopped. In silence, without a thought of consequence. The boy stepped forward. From his pocket, he took the half loaf of bread, dry, rough, and nearly crumbling. To anyone else, it meant nothing. But to Eli, it was everything. And he gave it away. The old man slowly lifted his head. Their eyes met. In that brief second, time seemed to pause. Two souls, one forgotten by youth, one abandoned by age-crossed paths. Neither knew the truth. Neither could sense the blood that connected them. But something deeper stirred. A spark buried beneath years of pain. Something ancient. Something sacred. As Eli turned and walked away, the wind picked up, swirling the leaves around his feet. He didn't look back. He never saw the tear that slid down the old man's cheek, and he never knew. He had just fed the man who once held him as a baby. The city never sleeps, but some souls inside it feel as though they've been asleep for years, forgotten, wandering, waiting. The old man sat on that park bench long after the boy had gone. His hands trembled as he held the crumbling piece of bread, still warm from the boy's touch. He had been hungry, yes. But it wasn't the bread that stirred something inside him. It was the face, that boy's face. There was something hauntingly familiar about it. A softness in the eyes, the way he tilted his head when giving. It echoed in the old man's memory. Like a whisper from a dream he had lost long ago. He tried to recall names, faces, but age and sorrow had blurred the past. He could barely remember the name of his own daughter. The one he had lost. The one who had vanished from his life with a newborn in her arms. A child he never saw again. Years of guilt had rotted him from the inside. He had once lived in a house with gates and chauffeurs. But after losing them, his family, his legacy, his name, he had wandered into silence, choosing the cold streets over a warm home that no longer felt like his. Now, after all this time, a boy. A boy with familiar eyes and a heart too big for his tiny frame. The old man wrapped the bread in a scrap of cloth and placed it beside him. He could not eat. Not yet. He sat still for hours, staring at the sidewalk, hoping to see the boy again. Needing to. But Eli was already gone, back into the shadows of the city. Unaware of the storm his kindness had awakened. He had simply done what he always did, give what he had, then disappear like a leaf in the wind. But this time, the wind followed him, and behind him, on a bench worn by rain and regret, sat a man whose life had just been shattered by the quiet touch of recognition. He didn't know the boy's name. Not yet, but deep inside, he feared. He might already know his blood. Eli returned to the shelter just before the streetlights blinked on, his body cold, but his heart strangely warm. He hadn't eaten all day. His stomach ached. Yet he didn't regret giving away his only piece of bread. Not once. It was a pain he had grown used to, a hunger that sat beside him like a quiet friend. Inside, the shelter was dim and silent. The same cracked walls. The same metallic scent of damp clothes and forgotten children. He curled up on the thin mattress, pulling his arms tight around his chest. Outside, the wind howled like a mother calling out in the night, but no one answered. Somewhere else, on that same wind-swept evening, the old man sat in the same position on the bench. The blanket around his shoulders had slipped, but he didn't feel the cold. He held the bread in his hand not to eat it, but to remember it. He couldn't bring himself to take a bite. It wasn't food anymore. It was a memory. A whisper from a time he couldn't reach. The boy's eyes, they haunted him. They mirrored the eyes of someone he once loved. Someone he failed. He stared into the darkening sky and asked himself a question that burned. Could it be? He didn't know the boy's name. He didn't know where he came from. But he knew one thing. This boy had touched something buried deep inside. Something that hadn't moved in decades. So he did something he hadn't done in years. He rose. He folded the piece of bread inside his coat like it was sacred and began to walk. Slowly, step by step, toward the edge of the city, toward the places he once avoided, shelters, corners filled with forgotten children, whispers of old family names, because deep down he needed to know if this boy was the piece of himself he thought was lost forever. The next morning came without sunlight. A gray sky hung low above the city, casting long cold shadows on cracked pavement and worn brick walls. But for the old man, the world suddenly felt different. For the first time in years, he had purpose. In his steps, he wandered through neighborhoods where forgotten souls drifted. He spoke to those who never spoke back. He asked about a boy thin, small kind, wearing a tattered school uniform. He didn't know his name, only the warmth in his eyes. Some shook their heads. Others turned away. But one old woman sitting by a soup truck raised her finger and pointed toward the West End, toward the orphanage that everyone tried to forget. And so he went. Meanwhile, Ale was washing dishes in the back of the shelter. It was his way of repaying the place that barely fed him. He didn't know someone was searching for him. He didn't know that somewhere, not far from those rusted pipes and dusty halls, a stranger was following invisible threads of memory threads, stitched into the boy's very being. That evening, as the sun finally broke through the clouds for a moment, the old man stood across the street from the orphanage. It was falling apart, wrapped in silence and sadness. He stood still, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a terrible hope. And then he saw him. The boy was outside, helping a smaller child fix a broken shoe with tape. His face focused, his movements gentle. The old man nearly fell to his knees. Face, that jawline, that unspoken kindness. It was her. It was her all over again, his daughter. In that boy, he pressed a shaking hand to his chest. It hurt, the grief, the wonder, the truth. He didn't have confirmation. He didn't need it, because in that moment, he knew ... he had found his grandson. That night, the old man couldn't sleep. He sat beneath the overhang of an abandoned building, shielding himself from the cold drizzle, cradling the piece of bread still wrapped in cloth. His body ached, but his soul had awakened. He had found the boy. He had found his blood, but how could he tell him? He was nothing now. No name, no home. Just a broken man with a haunted past and pockets full of regret. He had no right to disturb the fragile life the boy had built, no matter how harsh it was. Still, he needed to speak. Even if the boy never heard him, he needed to say what had weighed on his heart for decades. So with trembling hands, he found a torn paper bag and the stub of a pencil from the shelter's donation box. He wrote in silence, beneath flickering streetlights, with the city's hum like a heartbeat around him. He wrote of a daughter lost too young, of mistakes that shattered a family, Of the day she vanished without a trace, holding a newborn child. The child he now believed stood across the street in a worn school uniform. Wrote with tears falling onto the page, he told Eli everything, that he was loved before he was born. That he was never forgotten, only lost. That kindness, like the bread he gave, carried a power far greater than money or pride. That sometimes, a single act of goodness can rebuild what life tried to destroy. When the letter was done, he folded it carefully. His hands paused for a long while before he wrote one final line. "You are not alone. Not anymore." Then, he slept. And when morning came, he walked toward the orphanage with that letter in hand. But fate, as always, was watching, because someone else had seen the boy too. Someone who didn't want the past to return. That night, the old man couldn't sleep. He sat beneath the overhang of an abandoned building, shielding himself from the cold drizzle, cradling the piece of bread still wrapped in cloth. His body ached, but his soul had awakened. He had found the boy. He had found his blood. But how could he tell him? He was nothing now. No name, no home. Just a broken man with a haunted past and pockets full of regret. He had no right to disturb the fragile life the boy had built, no matter how harsh it was. Still, he needed to speak. Even if the boy never heard him. He needed to say what had weighed on his heart for decades. So with trembling hands, he found a torn paper bag and a stub of a pencil from the shelter's donation box. He wrote in silence, beneath flickering streetlights, with the city's hum like a heartbeat around him. He wrote of a daughter lost too young, of mistakes that shattered a family, of the day she vanished without a trace, holding a newborn child. The child he now believed stood across the street in a worn school uniform. He wrote with tears falling onto the page. He told Eli everything, that he was loved before he was born, that he was never forgotten, only lost. That kindness, like the bread he gave, carried a power far greater than money or pride. That sometimes, a single act of goodness can rebuild what life tried to destroy. When the letter was done, he folded it carefully. His hands paused for a long while before he wrote one final line. "You are not alone. Not anymore." Then, he slept. And when morning came, he walked toward the orphanage with that letter in hand. But fate, as always, was watching, because someone else had seen the boy too. Someone who didn't want the past to return. The city had no idea what it had witnessed. No headlines, no crowd. Just a storm quietly unraveling inside an old man's chest. Days passed. The letter was gone, stolen by fear. The truth buried once again by greed. But something inside the old man refused to fade this time. A flame that had flickered for decades now burned with purpose. He had been silent too long. He had lost too much. He would not lose the boy. And so, with nothing left to his name but memory, he returned to the shelter where the broken find warmth. There, he met a volunteer, an old woman with eyes like mercy, who listened when no one else would. He told her the name of his daughter, the name he hadn't spoken in years. And her face changed. She remembered. The girl had come to that very shelter 13 years ago, scared and pregnant. She had given birth. She had whispered a name, and then she was gone, swallowed by the city. Her child left behind. That child was Eli. The confirmation shattered him and healed him all at once. He had been right. The boy, the orphan with nothing, was his grandson, his own flesh, his only living family, the petit. Next day, he returned to the orphanage. This time, he brought no letter, no proof, only his presence. He waited outside as children played. And then he saw him. Eli. Still wearing the same torn shoes, still carrying the weight of the world in his small, brave shoulders. The boy glanced up. Their eyes met. For a long moment, nothing moved, but something passed between them. Not words, Not logic. Something older. Something sacred. Recognition. Eli stepped closer, slowly, uncertain but drawn. And when he reached the old man, he did what no one had done in years. He sat beside him. The old man didn't speak. He didn't need to, because Eli reached into his pocket, pulled out his last piece of bread, and broke it in two, just like before. But this time, they ate it together. No papers. No court. No headlines. Just love. Pure. Quiet. Undeniable. And in that moment, on a park bench beneath the whispering trees, the past no longer mattered, because a poor orphan had found more than family. He had found his beginning.